We're going to begin this webinar right now. It's now exactly 7 o'clock and we expect others to join us as they can. My name is Marilyn Bardet, and I'm a founding member of the Good Neighbor Steering Committee, and I will be serving as host tonight for this evening's GNSC Candidates Forum. I welcome each of our candidates for mayor, Christina Strawbridge and Steve Young, and for City Council, Tom Campbell, Trevor McKenzie, and Terry Scott. And I welcome the public attending, all of you who take a great interest in our town. Thank you all for your participation. This forum was created independently by the Good Neighbor Steering Committee without any financial donation or other support from any outside source, individual, commercial, or corporate. First, a word or two about the Good Neighbor Steering Committee's long history as a citizens environmental watch group. A number of us founded the original group in 2000 when Valero purchased the Benicia Refinery from ExxonMobil. Of that momentous ownership change, we said then, a cloud of uncertainty is hanging over Benicia. We feel this uncertainty hanging over us now, 20 years later. Over 20 active years, our credibility has been earned by our persistent commitment to fact-finding and asking pertinent questions and to evidence-based persuasion and advocacy on behalf of the community for public health and safety and for a healthy environment. We've met many challenges. For the record, over the years, our members have participated in establishing the city's first Benicia Community Sustainability Commission, as well as the city's Climate Action Plan. In 2003, we commented and legally challenged the EIR for the refinery's decades-long Valero Improvement Project, we refer to as VIP. In 2009, when Valero proposed further changes to their facility under the EIR, we went to bat to challenge their EIR addendum on procedural as well as substantive grounds. As a result, with pro bono legal counsel provided by local land use attorney Dana Dean, we negotiated a settlement agreement with Valero that provided approximately $14 million for environmental projects that support water and energy savings benefiting both the city and the community. In 2010, the city of Benicia became a party to the amended agreement, at which time, with dedicated settlement funds, the closed Mills Elementary School was transformed into Benicia Community Center. GNSC members have addressed various major planning and development proposals. From 2013 to 2016, we actively participated with Benicians for a Safe and Healthy Community to challenge and defeat Valero's proposed crude by rail project. Most recently, we initiated a second amendment to the settlement agreement that, as adopted, reallocated $1.4 million to 4 major projects selected by the GNSC for funding, including the Benicia Community Air Monitoring Program, for which a nonprofit has recently been established. This is the first time, though, that we're attempting, for the sake of public education, to host a candidates forum to spotlight certain issues of concern to the public regarding the future of our city, climate change, and the city's and communities' relationship to the refinery. I'm going to go over the protocols for the webinar. The webinar format we've chosen will not include interaction with the viewing audience or with me. This is not a debate. We've asked candidates to frame their answers to stand alone, representing their own thoughts on a topic. A candidate may refer to another's response, but not in the form of a rebuttal or rejoinder to anyone else's comments. As host, I will ask each candidate to respond to each question with an order established alphabetically. We will begin with mayoral candidates first and council candidates second. To be fair, I will rotate the order so that with each question posed, a different candidate will go first. All questions were drafted by the GNSC. All candidates, and only the candidates, were sent the questions in advance with background information for context. This was done to allow the candidates to study and prepare for tonight's forum. In the interest of time, I will not be reading the background info provided, but I will be announcing the topic areas for each question. Each candidate will have up to 3 minutes to answer, and our co-host, Constance Butel, will be monitoring the time. She will be either raising a sign or saying 30 seconds, please. The GNSC members and the webinar attendees will appreciate succinct and clear answers. We hope this evening's forum will be educational for the candidates and the viewing public alike. For the public's benefit, because we are especially concerned in this forum to discuss the city's and community's health, safety, and our future in relation to the Valero Refinery, we thought it important and appropriate to remind candidates of the conflict of interest rules and advisories under the Political Reform Act dated August 2015 that is under jurisdiction of the State of California's Fair Political Practices Commission. I'm sure you're all aware. The Political Reform Act is for public interest. The Political Reform Act applies to all elected appointed officials and employees working for government at every level. The Act states, and I quote, "In order to prevent a conflict of interest, a public official should, 1, identify and fully disclose the financial interests that may cause a conflict, 2, understand the different types of financial interests that may be the basis for a conflict, and 3, consider whether the decision's effect on the official's financial interest is reasonably foreseeable and material." The Act details these precautions. According to the FPPC, the Act relies, and I think this is important, the Act relies on individual citizens to monitor the decision-making of the elected and appointed representatives to identify whether they have a conflict of interest with respect to a specific decision. Much of the enforcement of the Act's conflict of interest provision is based on citizens' complaints. In other words, these are things that I would say help democracy, help people to be paying attention to their electeds. If elected, a key question is whether you would declare any conflict of interest, including perceived conflict of interest, in any decision-making that would specifically involve the Valero Refinery. The public needs to know. And I'm not posing that question to any of you. I'm just stating that that is of interest. Topic area 1, air quality and PM 2.5, and that's particulate matter at 2.5 microns, or let's say PM 2.5 or less, smaller. So here's question number 1. Because acute and chronic exposure to PM 2.5 is a serious health risk, especially for children with developing lungs, the elderly, and people with pre-existing health conditions, what responsibility will you take as an elected official to ensure that Benicians are well informed of the multiple health risks associated to chronic exposures to toxic air pollution, including PM 2.5?
Thank you. And I want to echo what Christina said about the good works that the Good Neighbors Steering Committee has done in the community and continues to do. I think inherent in the question is the larger issue of climate change. I think we all agree that climate change is real, that it's really what's causing these extensive and increasing numbers of fires. Unfortunately, the fires are not only going to continue, but they're probably going to get worse. And so there is and it's the fires themselves and the smoke from the fires that's, I think, one of the things that we want to focus on, at least in this question. The question of how to alert people as to what's going on is really something that should not be that difficult. Alert Solano, for example, is an important asset, but they don't really deal with this type of pollution. And I think it could certainly be a suggestion to Alert Solano to add to their warning system when the air quality gets above a certain number, say 100. Christina mentioned purple air. I use a thing called Air Care. It's the same kind of a thing. There's no reason the city itself should not put on its website a constant reading of what the air quality is using either one of those platforms, and a explanation of what that means. What does it mean when the air quality is 100 or 150 in terms of what you as a citizen should be aware of? Not to go outside and exercise, to exercise extreme caution above certain levels. I think those are simple things that the city can do to provide that kind of information to the community. And the other thing that's connected to wildfires is, and this is though on a statewide basis, so it's not specific to Benicia, but we're allowing, cities and communities are allowing development to happen in what's called the urban wildlife interface. They're allowing development to go out further and further into the woods, and then with the expectation that should there be a problem, the taxpayers, of course, are going to be there and going to protect their homes, and we do. The fire departments go out, and that's their first priority, is to protect
30
people.
seconds.
So I think we need to talk to our state representatives about perhaps some limitations on the extent of development in the urban wildlife interface. Thanks.
Between the City of Benicia and the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which we refer to as BAQMD, involving community air monitoring and public health concerns, and a question about Valero's property tax assessment. So we're going to start for question 2 with Steve Young, right? We're giving everybody 5 minutes because there are 4 parts, and what I'm going to do is read each part to you separately so that we can distinguish between these parts. Is everybody in agreement with that?
Got it. So we'll go through each question.
Okay, yeah, so you don't have to remember all these part questions.
Okay.
As an elected official, what actions would you take to ensure that the City Valero Cooperation Agreement's terms are fulfilled to improve communication?
I was ready to talk about the air district.
This is about the city's relationship to the air district, plus about community health issues monitoring, and sorry if I didn't make that clear. It is about the cooperation agreement, the relation of the city to Valero.
So the cooperation agreement was put in place to address many of the issues that were hanging out as a part of the ISO proposal. And the council majority decided that they did not want to do an ISO, and they were going to do this cooperation agreement instead. And I think it's fair to say that the cooperation agreement probably would not have come forward in the shape that it did if not for the fact that an ISO was the alternative. And so when we signed the agreement, there were a number of good things in it. Valero agreed to pay for a division chief in the fire department who was going to be the liaison between the city and Valero. The city was going to set up a information bank that would include lots of information from Valero. They were going to add additional air monitors along their northwest fence line. And they were providing some mobile air monitors as well. All of those things were good. And then, of course, there was also a settlement, financial settlement with the Good Neighbor Steering Committee. That was probably, what, a year ago, maybe? Things have not necessarily progressed a lot since then. Some things did happen. We got the money for the division chief. The division chief was appointed, but then he retired 3 months later. And now we're in a situation where we're recruiting for another person to fill that role, and Chief Chadwick is fulfilling that role now, and I'm doing a great job, I think. But I think we need a dedicated person to deal with that.
I want to move to the next one because there are 4 parts to this, and it's my fault that you didn't understand that first part. What will you do to ensure the city's cooperation with the Air District to fulfill the district's commitment in a reasonable time frame to fund and establish and operate a community-based air monitoring station in Benicia for public benefit.
So part of the agreement was, and it wasn't really part of this agreement, but the air district on its own in refinery cities had agreed to put in and pay for an independent air monitoring system, which was really something that was going to be housed in a trailer. And they suggested that the best place to do that would be Robert Semple School, which is the closest location to the refinery. I didn't think that was necessarily the best place because there's already a whole bunch of monitors all around the refinery. The district itself said it shouldn't be close to sources of pollution like freeways. Well, Robert Semple's pretty close to 780. But the real problem was the school district did not want to have it on Robert Semple property. So it falls back on the city to come up with a location and the air district to agree. I think it ought to be in Southampton somewhere. I suggested Community Park or Jack London Park because I think not only is it the closest neighborhood to the refinery, but it is also where a lot of these emissions have floated when the wind is going in the wrong direction. And so I don't believe the chief has suggested that he would take some people from the air district around and show them these locations. I don't know where that status is right now, frankly. So I'm a little frustrated that we haven't been able to close the deal on this a year later.
Great. And now the third part of this, would you consider appointing a council member to attend occasional BAQMD board meetings and or air district committee meetings when agendas include items pertaining to refinery operations, such as emissions reductions, state targets for GHG and carbon emissions reductions, status of fence line air monitoring and reporting, and community-based air monitoring evaluations?
Well, not only that, I would go further than that. I think the county has not necessarily done Benicia a favor in terms of the appointments that they've made to the air district. Solano County gets 2 appointments. I suggested to Supervisor Brown last year that Mayor Patterson be appointed to the air district by the board. The board did not do that. Instead, they appointed the mayor of Sassoon City. So we have the mayor of Sassoon City and a supervisor from Fairfield representing the county, and no one from Benicia or District 2, which represents Benicia, is part of that group. Contrast that to Contra Costa County, where the mayor of Martinez is a member of the air district, and where the supervisor, Joya, who represents those districts, is also on the air district. So I think we're at a disadvantage when issues come up, because all we can do is show up, and I would show up, but you're limited to what, a minute, or I think is all the time they give you, and that's not sufficient. So I think the other complaint I have is that when fines are levied against Valero for excess emissions, the city sees none of that money. All of that money stays with the air district. We're the ones suffering the impact. And I don't understand why we should not at least get some of the fiscal relief that is coming with these fines that are being imposed on the refinery.
Thank you very much. Now, this last question deviates, and we ask about the property tax assessment, whether you feel it's fair and what would you do to ensure that it is?
Well, this is another unfortunate thing. Valero has appealed their assessment every year. This is a standard business practice that they undertake. Every taxpayer has a right to appeal their assessment, so I'm not saying that they shouldn't or couldn't do that. But the effect is that when they make the appeal, that appeal is usually a very long process. The city receives no money while that appeal is undertaken. And in the last time the appeal was
30 seconds.
Oh, they asked for, the county said it was worth $900 and some million. Valero argued that it was worth only $100 million. And then they settled at $734 million. but it took over a year for this to happen. So for more than a year, we received not a nickel in property tax, and property tax is the main portion of the receipts that we get from Valero directly.
Thank you. Easier. Topic area 3. The Air District's Regulation 12, Rule 15 required approved real-time fence line monitoring systems at all Bay Area refineries with reliable public reporting of raw data in real time. And we want to know about the status of Valero's compliance. So here are the questions, and we'll start with Tom Campbell. Good science requires independent validation of data. Under the City of Benicia Valero Cooperation Agreement, will you commit to asking for independent validation of raw data collected from fence line monitoring systems and for access to archive data for independent third-party review? And, this is part 2, what would you do to ensure that the amended settlement agreement's requirement for installing a 4th fence line pathway system on the northwest side of the refinery facing Southampton neighborhoods is accomplished and that the system is reliably operating?
Let me do the second part first, if I could. On what is it going to take to get the fence line monitoring installed? I also am not a chemist, and I don't understand why this is being held up because it can't read, the instrumentation is not advanced enough to read one particular gas or emission, hydrogen sulfide. Maybe Tom can explain it or Marilyn can, but why couldn't the instruments be installed now, even if they weren't measuring one particular gas? I think there's a value in measuring all the other emissions that are coming off of the refinery. The other point I want to make, as Marilyn said, this is something that they agreed to, that Valero agreed to as part of the agreement. And what I remember from those discussions is that Tom said that if this didn't happen, he was willing to change his vote and to vote for an ISO. And he can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my recollection. And if both he and I are on the council in January, this may be a topic that we need to bring up again. I think it was the threat of an ISO that brought everybody to the table. And we could use that again as a reason to push the agreement to actually be implemented. In terms of having a third-party verifier, if these readings are happening in real time and they are on the internet and available to anybody to see, and it's the same stuff that the Air District is reading, I think the way to do it is to have the Good Neighbor Steering Committee monitoring system up and running and be a second way to validate the numbers that we're seeing coming off of Valero. I trust that they would not mess with the numbers. I don't think that they have any reason to, but I think this kind of validation and ratification of the numbers would be an important thing to have.
The topic area is about Valero's and the Port of Benicia's contributions to greenhouse gases and toxic emissions and the status of the reductions of those emissions to date, and the City of Benicia's Climate Action Plan, which, in my opinion, this is to add one little tidbit here, needs updating. And so I'll get to the question. The public has a right to know the current level of greenhouse gas emissions and reductions achieved by Valero and the Port of Benicia. As called for under the Climate Action Plan, what will you do to encourage further emissions reductions, including greenhouse gases, at the Valero Refinery, including its port terminal operations and asphalt plant, as well as to encourage reduction of emissions resulting from import shipping activity at the Port of Benicia?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would agree that Valero needs incentives from the city in order to reduce greenhouse gases, if that's what I heard. The issue of greenhouse gases are really is regulated by the state, it's regulated by the air district. I think the ability of the city to impact or regulate the actual emissions of greenhouse gases is somewhat limited. However, I think there is something we can do with imports. One of the things that I learned about when I was on the Planning Commission and we were dealing with crude by rail proposal, and I read all of those documents, and part of the argument that was being made at the time was that moving oil by rail was actually environmentally superior to bringing it in by ship. And so there was a number of studies that were included that had to do with the greenhouse gases that were emitted by oil tankers. And one of the realities is that there is a lot of GHG that's emitted by oil tankers, but it's not really measurable because it's happening out at sea. And by the time the tankers get into port and tie up at the dock at ports, it's hard to measure what they're doing, except for the fact that they may, and I don't know that this is in fact the case, but if it is, it's something that the city ought to advance, the idea that they are leaving those ships idling. They are not turning them off. There's got to be a tremendous amount of GHG being released while those ships are in port. And I think the city ought to look at some kind of a ordinance perhaps that requires them to power down to the level that is just minimal needed to complete the offloading. And I think that alone might be a way to improve our GHG emissions situation, at least at imports.
Topic area because it deals with our future and global warming and what we can do about it locally in our own, bailiwick and through what we can do through our council and advocacy. So this is the topic area: perspectives on current changing operating conditions among Bay Area refiners, the future of Valero Refinery in Benicia, State of California climate goals to achieve drastic GHG reductions by 2050 to bring about a net zero carbon economy, and the City of Benicia's response to a recently published research report titled Decommissioning California Refineries, Climate and Health Paths in an Oil State, a Communities for a Better Environment report dated July 2020, brand new, which proposes annually phased reductions at approximately 5% in refinery production capacity to meet state climate goals. So the question is, Valero's stated intention is to be the last man standing among Bay Area refineries. Valero is committed to processing dirtier crude oil slates for gasoline, jet fuel, and other products. What is your current level of concern about global warming and for reducing refinery emissions, including GHG, in relation to state targets to slow global warming and create a zero carbon economy by 2050?
Was when talking about the environment was think globally, act locally. And so I think it's really the question is, what can we do locally that will have an impact on our own particular living situation and the environment? What the state goals that they have implemented, they are very ambitious, but they're necessary. If we're really going to meet these climate goals by 2035 for all electric vehicles, and 2050 for zero carbon, there's going to have to be lots of changes that are implemented. But as Terry said, we don't have this infrastructure to support a 100% electric vehicle fleet at this point. Hopefully we're going to move towards that. The fact that 2 of the 5 refineries in the Bay Area have closed is a sort of a dual-edged sword. It's good for Valero in the sense that there's less competition, but it may also incentivize them to produce as much as they can, as fast as they can, which will of course have environmental impacts as well. If I think the city is somewhat limited, to be honest, in how we can impact Valero's reduction of GHG. Even if we had a ISO, I don't think any ISO, including the ones that exist in Contra Costa now, are able to directly impact that question. These are regulations that come down from the state and that are implemented by the air district. And I'm not sure the city has a role in overlapping what is currently being done. If, however, Valero comes forward in the next couple of years with a project that's going to require city approvals, or a process change that would require city approvals, then I think it's appropriate to sit down with them and ask about their operations and what can be done to limit their GHG production. They're a relatively clean refinery as refineries go. I think we should recognize that. I made the proposal that the council adopted to shift to an all-electric vehicle fleet to the extent possible. And so now when the city looks to replace vehicles, they're supposed to first look at the possibility of going electric before they come back and go to a traditional vehicle. And
30 seconds.
The issue that Christina raised earlier of water sustainability, I know it's not the topic of this particular webinar, but I think there are things that the city can do to establish water security going forward. And with climate change and the increasing droughts that we're going to face, I think it's something we need to be talking about.
So it's so educational to have this level of discussion amongst you. And I don't think we've ever had that level of focus in this kind of way at a council meeting. Well, you wouldn't expect it at a council meeting because of all the rigmarole to get things on an agenda. But I really hope that we'll have more opportunity for public workshops so that people can come to understanding about these things, and that you are involved with those levels of discussion would be extraordinary. And in these times with global warming, which we now feel so intimately with these fires where we can't go outside, we are learning something every day about our own tolerance level for what this holds for us if we don't do things to address global warming and slow this down. And you've all contributed very important things to the discussion. I did hear some things that I could have commented on, me personally, from my reading and etc. But this just is the beginning. I'm hoping this will be an open opportunity to propose workshops, etc., where the public is involved and can come and learn more. But you've set the stage, and I'm glad that we took this risk, in a sense, for the Good Neighbors Steering Committee to host this. So I want to thank you very, very much for participating. We've had up to about 58 attendees. We thank the public for hanging in there on these rather complicated subjects and focused commentary on Valero. And we believe that everyone should vote. You know, those of you who are attending, your vote is so important so that we hear your voice. And the counts, I think we're very lucky to have the council slate candidates that are running. I'm very glad for this. The people running that will have fresh opportunity for these kinds of discussions. I just want to announce that we will be, we've recorded this webinar. It will be available on YouTube, and Constance Butel may try to edit it so that we have the actual webinar as it progressed, and then also each of you with your own responses to these questions. And I would like to figure out a way to get our questions and the background information that we offered out to the public as well, and I'm sure it's possible. So we did a pretty good job sticking to the time. It's now 8:42. So on that note, I would like to close unless anybody has any questions that you think pertinent to wrap this. Not any big statement, but if there's any question, and also I just would like to say, since some of you brought up about the Benicia Community Air Monitoring Program, BCAMP, and the nonprofit that has been established and what we're doing, and we will very much appreciate being able to tell you about that. We're very excited. It's happening. So with that, I'd like to thank you and say good evening to you all.